Welcome to another edition of Special Needs Jungle in Conversation with. Today I have the privilege of talking to two very prominent SEND advocates to help us explore the woefully under-addressed issues that are faced specifically by Black and ethnic minority groups when accessing services for their children with special educational needs or disabilities. Firstly, we have Marguerite. Welcome, Marguerite. She's a very well-known face at Special Needs Jungle as she's our associate editor, and also she's head of SEND at Sunshine Support. We also have Venessa Bobb, who is the founder of A Second Voice, if I pronounced that right, A Second Voice, which is a voluntary group run by parents and carers of autistic children and adults. Vanessa is also the branch officer of the National Autistic Society's Lambeth Autism Group and an Include Me Too award winner, I believe. I'm so glad to have you both here. I think you'll agree with me. This is a really, really important topic for our community to be aware of. I think especially so because it's very easy for us to assume that we're all in a united common fight to get services for our children, and therefore all of our experiences are the same. But that just isn't the case, and no one seems to be talking about it. So we're hoping to change that today, and hopefully this is just the start of a much bigger conversation that needs to be had throughout the SEND community. So without further ado, on to our first question. What do we mean when we talk about Black and minority ethnic groups?
Okay, Venessa, shall I start? And we'll just jump in at any point, Venessa.
Okay.
First and foremost, it's not something I like to be labelled as. I absolutely despise the acronym BAME.
Okay.
And I'll tell you the reason why. I'd like to call upon a sister who wrote about it, Filoki, I'm hoping I'm doing her some justice pronouncing her name, Adibisasi, I think that's how you say it, apologies. And she writes about how difficult it is to use it, and the only accurate part of the BAME is the A, the and, where we use it. Okay. When you try to explain it to people, it's very difficult because it's something that we've become to see as the norm. And what it does, it actually brings confusion because you assume that every Black person is the same. You presume that every Asian person is the same. And then that minority ethnic bit is just, what does that mean? So personally, I prefer not to use it and to ask me what I like to be, how I like to be identified. Second, so the acronym can be used as Black, Asian and minority ethnic, or BME, yeah? Or some people use the and, okay? And her blog, I'll send you the link, it explains it, breaks it down quite easily. But the most important part about it is, one of the important parts about it is the minority part. If we were to put Black and Asian people together, we're not actually a minority, we're a global majority. So it's about power opposed to numbers, but it's used for numbers to make us think that there is a problem and that we don't discuss racism. Okay. Does that make sense? So jump in at any point, Venessa.
Okay. I would say my perspective of BAM, I don't like the words because being a parent, from a parent's perspective, when you see that information on a flyer, you'll go to the event and when you look around, you may be the only Black person, or it may be the reverse where if you're saying that you are a BME organization and it's led by white community, that's misleading. Because sometimes from my perspective, where I've gone and I've spoke to other families and then they say something, it's like they don't want to talk about race. So why be called a BAM organization and you seem to want to sort of eliminate it? Yeah. For me, I always say to everybody, I'm not a BAM mother, I'm a Black mother first. And it's about respecting the fact that I think when we use the word Black, it's like people start to get scared that we're trying to isolate people. So when I see, an organization saying, I'm a Black, Asian, minority ethnic community organization, what do they really mean by that? Does it mean that they're there because is it a pot of money that they've applied for? And we're going to be very open. At the moment, because of what's happening with COVID, everything's become BAM crazy. Everybody's jumping on BAM. But then when you look at the information or you look at the services they're providing, do they have somebody in their family that can speak the language? So African community, they've got 2,000 languages. I can't speak all languages. I don't speak that as languages. I have to make sure I've got those families that can, you know, I've got volunteers that I can signpost them. But fortunately, you've got a lot of all these organizations. Are they really in tune with the community? Because right now, if they're trying to say we're outreaching to the BME community, and COVID-19 right now can't even get the voice of the BME community in regards to the learning disability and autism community, we are failing the community. So when we talk about BAM, Black and Asian community, I can speak as a Black mother, but when it comes to the Asian community, our culture is very different. But when you're in the Black community, Black is a very broad term, because when you break it down now, you've got the Jamaican community, you've got the Bajan community, you've got the Guyanese community, you've got the African community, then you've got the dual heritage community who may be married into the Black community. And if people who are white families who've got mixed race children who are from the Black community, you'll find that most of those families sometimes are experiencing racism. They may not talk about it, but it is there. If you're saying that you're supporting the BME community, make sure that you have people on your panel in the decision making that represents those communities. Don't say, well, we've got one Black person, that Black person cannot speak for me, especially if, as I said to somebody the other day, if a mother came to my group and she was from the African community and she spoke language, I'm a Black mother. I may not understand her and I'm Black. So I sometimes have to shut my eyes and I've got to listen.
So tell me, now let's talk about why it's really, really important for us to be talking about SEND in, you know, how it refers to race and racism and your experiences. Why is it a really important conversation that we should be having?
Because I'm going to talk from a Black perspective, because I can't talk from anywhere else in regards to that. I can talk about Asian families that come to me, but I'm not Asian, so I can't. Because they're invisible. Race is forgotten, and SEND is not seen through an intersectional lens. And I know we'll talk about intersectionality in a minute. Special education needs in field, you know, is predominantly white, female, middle class women that are championing it, the cause, but Black people are not to be seen. I looked at all the charities this morning, the leading charities. There's no Black people in there in the trustees. There's not one. No. There's not one. So how are you going to advocate for my child? How? How are you going to advocate for them? How are you going to know the difficulties that they're facing? You're not, because there's nowhere there to speak about it. There's nobody there to put forward the opinions or the representations of people that look like me and my children. The 2018 Oxford University study looked at the disproportionality of ethnic and SEND, okay? And the poignant points of the report was that Black, Caribbean and Pakistani pupils are overrepresented for moderate learning difficulties, whilst Indian and Chinese pupils are underrepresented. Black, Caribbean and mixed white Black Caribbean are substantially overrepresented for SEMH. That's another label that needs to go. You know, I'm not saying that emotional mental health well-being is not important. Absolutely, it is key. But it's another one of those labels where Black children are lumped into it. I've worked with lots of families over the years like Venessa in a professional capacity and a personal capacity. And I've had families come to me and say where their children are diagnosed with autism and ADHD and they've been told to ignore that and to concentrate on SEMH. I'm like, how does that work? It doesn't make any sense. So that's another label that's assigned, that it's a behaviour, there's a challenge of behaviour, and those negative connotations don't do our children any good. It makes it triply hard to get a diagnosis, triply hard to have that conversation. You know, my daughter went to the doctors to get the diagnosis of autism. She was told, no, it just couldn't happen. You've got eye contact, you're talking to me. Autism is painted as a white male neurological difference. It's only now we're having the conversation about girls and women, but we're not having the conversation about Black, the conversation about Asian. It's not there, it's not spoken about. It's there, but it's not spoken about because it's not seen to be that way. And the people that are doing the diagnoses that have come up with it have done it in a Eurocentric way. So if they don't see what they want to see, that child surely can't be autistic. But I guarantee there'll be loads of black men that are incarcerated that are definitely autistic.
Yeah. No, I think that actually that study is a hugely important study. And if anyone hasn't heard of it, which I'm guessing most people haven't, because sadly, it's a fantastic study. And they actually produce separate reports for each 152 local authorities, breaking down the disparity between different ethnic groups, and that has just disappeared. So they did all this work and it's never talked about, and that to me is probably more shocking than anything else, is the fact. Sorry, so carry on.
No, but Renata, it's not going to have an impact, and I'm going to say this honestly. It's come from the University of Oxford. How many times do us as black people have to be subject to the same triggering information? We knew it before university wrote it. We didn't need the university to highlight. So I agree that it is, but you're not going to get the impact because we've heard it all before. We've heard it all before, so you're like, okay, we know. They've just replaced it. Bernard Cohen spoke about it from in the 1970s. It was called ESN then, and that we were, my mum, when she came here, she was part of the Windrush. When she came here, the labels that they were given, that, intelligence, subnormal, is just being replaced by SEMH. It's just more palatable to the space that it's in. But we absolutely need it to go. Please, Vanessa.
All right, I would say I'll put on my parent perspective, because it took me years just to be heard. And as Marguerite was saying, when it looked at my children, they always put social, emotional, mental health everywhere. It took my daughter nearly 10 years before she got diagnosed with autism and ADHD, epilepsy, and severe receptive expressive language. But still, people are telling me there's nothing wrong with her. It's my parenting skills. And it frustrates me when I look at my son, who's 17 now, and everything that I went through from the time he was diagnosed in 2008 to now, to date, all the support, all the help I was asking for, I still didn't get. I had to fight. I had to go to tribunals. I had to represent myself. I didn't know nothing about legal aid at the time, so I did at the end. But to me, a bit too late when you look at my son now, because he was failed all his life. I've got trails and trails of emails of where I went to organizations asking for help, begging for help. I bared all, and still all I was told is that it's my parenting skills. So for me right now, it's how can we change that narrative, is when we look at SEND and the black communities, I'm talking about me as a black mother, is that when you've got my children were excluded, when I tried to say, I know it's not the behavior, there's something else, but then they got diagnosed with autism. Did anybody come and compensate me for the time for me giving up my career? So when we look at that word, it's like the problems of black families that are facing is that if the black parent doesn't understand what autism is, then it's the professional against the professional who may be helping the parent. So if they see a white professional, they may not want to listen to that white professional because they thought, you're labeling my child. So we do need people like Marguerite. We need the black professionals that are out there that have been brought to the forefront. Because again, it's always back to that word again, BME, because they've got somebody who's Asian, may able to speak for the black person. No, because when you come into the household as a social worker, and then you're turned around and you're saying, oh, single mother, excuse me, everywhere you see they're blaming single mothers. I was married. I had my husband at the time. My son still had the same behavior, even though we got divorced. But they don't see that. We just seem to be on a label, is that we're single mothers, we're illiterate. I worked in television, but sometimes people only see me about autism. I tell everybody I'm an intelligent person, but the way I was being belittled by the social services was I wasn't educated enough. I read the information. Even though I did a second voice and I'm part of the, do stuff with the National Autism Society, those things were never taken seriously. I still was challenged, and they still saw me as thick. I don't care what anybody says to me. I don't matter how much acts I knew about the educational law. It doesn't matter how many meetings I went to the Houses of Commons. But when I go back to what has happened to me today, my children are still being failed. So while I'm still helping the BME families, right now as a black mother, my voice still hasn't been heard. I'm still fighting a fight because the specialists out there, or the professionals within the local authorities, they still don't understand that when they're looking at autism, when it manifests in Black families, it gets missed, because they're looking at emotional health, they're looking at mental health, they're looking at the behavior. Oh, because that child is acting a certain way, it's because there's domestic violence in the home. They don't unpick it, because they're quick to look at, like my son's educational healthcare plan. Why have they got my domestic abuse in there? What's that got to do with the education? So for me right now, it's calling out for what it is. If you are a professional, no matter if you're Black, white, Asian, and you know that there's domestic violence, there's a sexual abuse in the family, that's got nothing to do with the EHCP, with the parent. It's about the education. And I think that's what happens, is that when it comes to us parents, as Black parents, if we can't verbalize and we can't speak for ourselves, parents are not reading the information. I always seem to find in a lot of the Black parents' files, they're aggressive, or they've misunderstood. What is it that they want? Why are they complaining? I've seen it in my files. You know, she's got a chip on her shoulder. You know, what does she expect from us? So my question is, what is a child in need? What is a child in need if social services come? You know, there's all these information in the files, and when you're asking a professional, they turn around and say, well, you're not entitled to that. I'm not knowing that I know professionals have said, but Vanessa, you are entitled to that. So this is what I'm saying, is that I have been belittled, I have been demoralized, I have been challenged all the time to prove myself, to justify why I do what I do. I'm tired, because I feel that word Black minority ethnic community has got mixed up with the SEND. But when it comes to us as Black people, Black families, our children's voices haven't been heard, because when they see a behavior, boom, straight to exclusion. Then they get excluded. For my daughter to go through primary school all her life, where I never knew that she had epilepsy, she was having silent seizures. Then when she got into secondary school, it was like, oh, the reason why she was always sleeping, or she was doing whatever she was doing, or absent, she seemed to be in space, she was having seizures. I didn't get an apology from the local authorities. Said, okay, you was right when she was in primary school. So for me, and then you got my older daughter. She left home at 14, come back, and I'm going to say it. She came back at 16 pregnant. I had to deliver my grandson at home. But the question is, I tick the stereotype of single Black mother, challenging children, teenager mother. But if they know who I am, they were on Pick All the Mess. I know that 10 years ago, I asked for help from social services. I need help for my son. So you got 10, 11, 12 years of nobody listened to me. Is it because I was Black? I don't know. Because some of the professionals were Black, but as I said to Margarita, lack of education when it comes to probably a lot of the Black professionals. Because when they're making choices, are they doing ticking the boxes, or are they going on training to understand what autism is? Because social services, when they get involved, they're not looking for autism. All they're looking for is that the child looks like they're socially, emotionally, mental health. You've got domestic abuse. You're a survivor to child sexual abuse. The children seem to be very emotional because they don't see their dad. They make up all these things, and they don't realize is that I don't fit the tick in the box of the family because I am an advocate, but because what I do outside, when you match it to my home, I said it to everybody, I would be seen as dysfunctional. But it wasn't because I was a bad parent. It's because the services labeled me just by seeing me as a Black mother from the beginning, that my son was challenging, and they never ever rectified the problem. And I think that's the problem with the local authorities is, if you don't understand something, ask. If you don't like what we've got to say, it's not that we're being problematic. It's because if we've been in a job and we left our job and we like to ask questions, because I came from a TV background, don't patronize me and tell me, what do you expect from us? And I think that's why I became who I was, a second voice fighting for my son, because he wasn't allowed to speak, because he couldn't speak at the time. So for me, people need to listen to the real voices, not just listen to the tick in the boxes.
And I also think sort of when we're looking at disproportionality, and you look at actually the shockingly high amount of Black Caribbean children and mixed Caribbean children who are being labelled as having social, emotional and mental health, it begs the question, is that then lowering their opportunities? you know, if they're, what's being missed for those children. So many of those, and then those children are disproportionately represented in sort of PRU units. So, and then, you know, then you look at the prison population and you can see this, it's sort of like one thing perpetuates another. So then you have to ask the question, how many children in PRU units have missed SEND? And then those outcomes for those children are then, those kids have been completely failed right from the second that someone makes a judgment that because they're Black and Caribbean, it will be a subconscious judgment, I'm sure, and people won't realise it, but that means that the behaviours they're seeing aren't behaviours as a result of an unmet need. They are behaviours that are primarily a social, emotional or mental health need.
I don't think it's subconscious in that way. The system is built that way. It's structural racism, because Vanessa's story is, we've got some similarities. I was a single parent, I was a teenage mother, I had my own, you know, I was diagnosed with dyslexia at 14. I had that all the way through school. I was a child in care for sexual abuse. I didn't get my diagnosis until later, and I was judged all the time when social services tried to take my daughter off me, because I was living in a homeless shelter, and because she was burned at the hostel where we lived. They said that possibly couldn't happen. It was my fault. So social services came to remove her, but they said that because she was cared for and looked after, it was okay. But I had to go through all these meetings and child protection, and I made the decision that this is not going to happen to me. I'm going to have to fight this in a different way, different story, but it was, and I absolutely will resoundingly say, yeah, because I was Black. The systematic racism, without a doubt. It just couldn't have been any other way. Now people see me, yes, I'm married, and you know, I'm in a success. They don't know the journey. They have no clue about the journey, and it's this is not the first time, but it's the first time I'm sharing it publicly like that, because I think it's important to say it's extremely triggering. It's extremely difficult. And also the lack of knowledge in the Black community. We know that my daughter is autistic. We know it. I know it. Been going through it now. I know it.
And my daughter.
All the time that I would have to go to school to go and pick her up all the time, her behaviours all the time. And then being a teacher, teaching at the same school, I sometimes feel guilty thinking, was I masking that? Was I helping to mask the situation? And you taught from a young age, the child has got to be resilient. Me and Vanessa have this joke about doing the hair, you know, doing your daughter's hair. And she is screaming like, oh God, stop. You don't know, it's a sensory issue, but you're still going, oh God, you're nasty, come on. Your hair's got to be looked after. And you're thinking, oh my God, I didn't know that, because nobody had explained that.
And the loud music.
In those circles, it was when I started to educate and know everything. That's why that happens. That's why that behaviour happens. We have to also understand there is a massive stigma in the Black community about SEND, and it's about, as Vanessa said, the lack of knowledge, because the knowledge is not imparted. It's different. The way that it's sold, disability is sold as something, if you're religious, that it's something because God has said to you, you have failed, or it could be the fact that it's come from vaccines, dare I say it, that, you know, you've been it's that way. Oh my God, we can't have our children behaving that way in the community. It doesn't look right. Why is your daughter always behaving like that? Why is she like that? She's got no manners. And I'm like,
yes, I've been there.
Do you understand? It's so difficult. Melissa Simmons talks about it as an autistic adult, that we talk about girls masking. When you're Black, you triple mask. You have to be different things in different spaces all the time, and I'm not doing it anymore. My Blackness is here to stay. It doesn't stay at the door. This is who I am. If you don't like it, I'm saying what it is, because I'm here for all children, and anybody who knows, who's worked with me, everybody who comes to my door, I advocate for. But I recognise the disadvantage of the Black families that come to me. I recognise that I'm not dealing with just SEND, I'm dealing with housing, I'm dealing maybe with domestic violence, I'm dealing with a whole range of things, but I'm not judging them for it. I'm picking and knowing that by the time they've reached to me, they're at the end of the tether. And that's ways to be able to help.
Marguerite, and that is what the difference is with us, is that when somebody comes to us, we're able to understand the cultural values that is missing from a lot of other SEND autism groups. If they don't have somebody who can understand, if they come to the group and they may have something they want to share, but if they don't hear it, they're holding back. And it's always about the Black mixed race child. If they come to that group and that mother is made to feel that she can't speak, then she shelters. So she needs to know there's an outlet she can just outreach to. So for me, like I said, Marguerite, I can relate to everything she said. Going everywhere with my children was a nightmare. And like I said, when I met Marguerite, it was like, oh my gosh, every time I met a Black professional who got it, and I mean that word, they got it, I didn't have to keep on justifying why, because it's like, by the time I opened my mouth, they're telling me what I was thinking. And then when you meet my children, it's like, Mum, I like her, I like him, because they understood me. But when they've met Black people who didn't understand them, that's where the problem started for me. And that's what I thought, like Marguerite said, is there's Black professionals who do need to be educated, and they probably need to book Marguerite and a lot of them out there, because the wealth of information that she has, and the time that I've met her, and she made me realize that I wasn't saying things wrong. She was able to get me to understand certain things from a professional perspective, because there's a lot of angry mothers out there, but there's a lot of angry Black mothers out there because they don't know who to turn to.
Yeah, I think a lot of the time when you get the angry voice, people are angry because they are not being listened to. So that, again, that is the product of actually no one having the conversation in the first place. I also, sort of to go back to what you were saying about sort of being Black and autistic, historically, we have whitewashed over race, thinking that is us not being racist. It's actually going, oh, I'm talking about the child with curly hair, you know, not saying I'm talking about the Black child. And I think, you know, that's very sort of overly PC and tiptoeing around the issue. And actually that's done more harm than it has good. And I think we're still very much, and when I say we, I am sort of talking for the white community here. And, you know, and of course there are differences within the white community, but it's, you know, when people are desperately trying not to upset, not seeing race seems to be the solution, whereas actually it's perpetuating the issue. And so to draw on that a little bit, I wanted to just bring us to the subject of intersectionality, which I think is so poorly understood within the SEND community. And it was one of the things that actually prompted me to want to have this conversation, because I saw a lot of very well-meaning people online trying to relate their experiences and their child's experiences to the experiences of Black parents, saying, you know, yes, you know, you've struggled, but so have we. We all struggle. You know, we all struggle to get services. We all struggle to be heard. Our universal experience is common. There is no difference here. And they're saying it very well-meaningly, but, you know, it's just not factually correct. So I'd really appreciate it if perhaps you could talk a bit about your own experiences and what intersectionality actually means and why people need to understand it, certainly when they're talking about SEND, certainly at local authority level and definitely at government level. So, I mean, some of your own experiences would be really, really helpful.
So, you know, intersectionality was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw. Yeah, she coined the term. So it's a framework that looks at a group of people or a social problem that's affected by a number of discrimination and disadvantages. I fit that profile 10 times over. So I'm Black, dyslexic, and a woman, right? The woman and the dyslexic, absolutely, I could walk into a room and talk about feminism, people will listen to me. I could talk about dyslexia. The minute I mention Black, back gets up. Okay, we cannot talk about inclusivity if we don't talk about intersectionality. We have to move into inclusion is a myth. We can't have it if we don't talk about race and we're not inclusive. Yesterday, I attended a Zoom meeting for Black deaf people. You want to hear their experiences. It did make me cry, because the sign for Black used to be this, and it means wiping polish, Black polish on your face. And the man said, my name is David, but they refer to me like this, and I never knew what it meant. So the British Sign Language still has those racist signs. And one of the ladies that was speaking in there, she said, somebody asked me, well, what do you see yourself? Do you see yourself as a deaf black woman or black deaf woman? And she said, I had to think about that. What does that mean? And she says, I absolutely see myself as a black deaf woman. So when we talk about intersectionality, we need to see that they're interdependable. You can't separate them. And all too often, like I said to you, black people are expected to leave the blackness at the door. We have to call it for what it is. And if we are talking about inclusivity, we have to include race. We cannot. And I feel that the hiccups I've had throughout my SEND journey personally, family as a parent with a child with SEND and a child I've got a son who's moderate hearing losses, there was nothing in place for him. He wasn't diagnosed as deaf until he was excluded, probably by the time he was on his 15th exclusion, that he was moderate hearing loss. Every time we kept going to school and saying there's something wrong with his hearing. There's absolutely nothing he can hear. He's making the choices. He can't hear. He wears moderate hearing. They said that eventually he will be deaf. How is that? It's not. And that's we need to see disability, and we need to view now SEND through an intersectional lens.
You said it all for me. I think for me, as I said, every time when I look back with my son, it was always, they're just looking at the behavior, but I could see it was more to it. I knew it was because it was the color of his skin. I never did the race thing, because we said, oh, it's all about race. But for me, looking at my son to my daughter now, it was race. It was because they seemed to want to separate it apart, but I felt that it was so important, because when I look at him now at 17, there's so much failures, because at the beginning when I said he was told that he needed a positive black male role model, it took me 3-4 years for him to get one. It took, from once he had that black representation in his life, total different child. He's totally different. So it shows that why it's so important that you need, if someone says we need a black male representative for this child, don't try and say, oh no, we just get a white person. There's a reason behind when they're saying it. I know I've got the primary, as I said, my son is an example only because I've seen how this person who was commissioned to mentor him, his face lit up who it was. And just by how he spoke to him, the guy said, I don't have autism training, but he was willing to learn, this black guy. And from what he'd done, from when my son was very shy or wouldn't talk, he brought out another side that I couldn't do. So there are single mothers, black mothers out there, but we're not all single black mothers. And this is what it is. They always seem to label us as one way, and they forget about there are professional black professionals out there that need the support as well. I mean,
you have the disadvantages of having special educational needs, which all of our community will understand really well. I guess it's understanding that within context. So then you've also got the disadvantage of being black. And if you're a black male, and you just have to look at statistics and you'll see you're far more likely to be excluded. Then if you're black male and you come from a poor background, you're statistically, you're being put at an advantage all the time because of this institutionalized racism. So the way the system is set up, that yes, all of our children have a shared commonality in some circumstances, but then you've got a kind of disadvantage within a disadvantage. And so actually, if you're not hearing from those families, if you're not understanding those children, then the outcomes, you think of what these children, I mean, that wonderful video, have you seen it, of the race, where you have all children lined up and they actually show, what white privilege is. And a lot of white people get sort of quite defensive when they hear white privilege. They think it's an insult, and it's not an insult at all. It's just simply talking about the privileges that we have being born white, and therefore if we have white children, the privileges our children will have simply because of the colour of their skin. Yes, they will have some disadvantages because they have special educational needs, absolutely, but if they have special educational needs and they're black, those disadvantages will be twofold. And I guess it's really, really important, I think, for our community to understand that. And certainly, parent carer forums, I think it's something that just isn't spoken about.
one thing I've noticed is that when somebody says, I'm having a BME event, then they would turn and say, well, what's the difference in our community? And I'm like, you're not understanding. It's not that you're welcome to come, but it may not be of interest. It's just basically there's certain elements that are going to be missing. So when we're talking about, there's some families who have got autistic girls who may have gone through FGM, but that may not relate to the white community.
Yep.
And then there's things about sickle cell and autism.
Yep.
You've got there's all these other conditions that only affect the black community. So how is somebody going to disrespect if we're saying, look, we're doing a black autism group because there's elements within our culture that's not going to affect the white community? But for some reason, they feel that, well, that happens to me. Do you get sickle cell?
Yeah.
You know, so it's don't patronize or don't get upset. We're just saying that if somebody says, my daughter's got hearing impairment, she's autistic and black, she may go to that group, but the black element may affect her because her family may not accept that child who's got autism, who's got hearing impairment. So that is what I've noticed with me. I could be with everybody, autism is all the same, but you find sometimes with that black family, there was something that was different. They couldn't speak in that group. And then once we all come together, all of a sudden, everybody's like, oh my gosh, you went through that as well. I never heard that I didn't hear that in the group. So it shows there's a reason why, respect when we say that word, why we want to have a black autism group. We're not alienating you. It's because there's things that we need to talk about. Sickle cell, autism in a white autism group, are they going to do that? How are they to facilitate sickle cell if they don't know what it is? So that's where we have to understand about within the autistic community or black community, there's other things that need to be discussed that the non-BME groups are not going to be able to bring to the forefront.
And as we talked about earlier as well, the disproportionality, we know that actually the black community are going to struggle in the first place to get the correct diagnosis in a way. I mean, yes, we all struggle to get diagnosis, excuse me, but it would be more of a difficulty. And so therefore, yes, again, there's commonality, but also there will be a shared experience within the black community that it's not only, you know, for support wise, that actually the black community gets to talk about it, but also then that community has a voice and that is then heard at a higher level, so it's understood.
Yeah. And if we don't include people, what's currently happening is that not only are black children getting excluded from school, we're getting excluded from conversations. We're not included in conversation. And you've picked up on the parent carer forum, and this is not to bash the parent carer forum, but they don't do anything. There should never be a need for me to be doing what I'm doing just like this. We should be involved in the parent carer forums, and I'm not talking about tokenism because I've looked on the website, but it should be in the ethos of what they do. If you're inclusive, then it should just be there. We shouldn't have to ask for a seat at the table. It should just be there. And I want to just say this as well so that everybody's very, very clear. SNJ is not jumping on Black Lives Matter. Tanya's asked me to do this before we had conversations.
Exactly. Yeah, I can vouch for that.
Long time ago. It has been time. Yeah. And I'm going to be honest with you, Renata, it's exhausting. It's very, very triggering. You know, I'm talking to you, I'm holding back the tears. I'm being very honest with you because I can be about sharing it, because you get tired and you get exhausted saying the same thing, and you have to think, oh my god, if I say that now, are people going to think this about me? Are they going to? I know I don't really care, but you do think that because I'm a thoughtful person, so I do think that. So I just want to make it clear, SNJ are not jumping on the bandwagon. This is something that they've wanted to do. We've wanted to do
for a long time.
We appreciate you saying that. And also I think it's really important that sort of everyone takes responsibility for learning. It's not a case of find a black person and ask them to tell you what to think. Actually, responsibility lies with all of us to understand, especially, you know, I'm part of Parent Carer Forum, and I think it's really, really important that actually, you know, we are making sure that we are representative. And even things like surveys, we need to be very, very careful that actually the questions we're asking in the surveys are relevant for all of our community and not just representative of part, you know, and it's about understanding the questions that need to be asked before you then ask them, because how are you ever going to have the right data if you've never asked the right questions in the first place?
The surveys and the questionnaires, it's about, oh God, I've been teaching a long time. It's about 15 years ago. I was I was a governor at a large FE college. And they used to do these surveys, and all the time, the surveys, when they would ask about ethnicity, would start with white at the top. And I'd be like, well, why is white here? Let's do it alphabetically. Because if we did it alphabetically, there would be no problem. But that just tells me subconsciously, you believe white goes at the top and black goes at the bottom. So it's just simple things like that, that when you're asking and you want to get meaningful data, you need to ask the right questions and present it in the right way. You know, I advocate at lots of meetings, Renata. I had a parent this morning. Mum can't speak English very well, but school are forcing her to make sure that she can read the documentation. She can't do it. She needs an interpreter. She's entitled to that, so she can access and communicate. But it seemed to be, no, we can't get an interpreter in time. You just have to, can you get somebody from your family to do it? No, everybody's working. It's just things like that, making sure that there is access to information. And that's where, like I say, your question about the intersectionality and the ethnic disproportionality within the community, how it affects us, is it contributes to the school to prison pipeline, the lack of resources, and I'm going to say the emotional and the well-being of our Black children is immense. I swear that we're suffering with PTSD, honestly.
I say it's not just the children, it's the families too.
Because you're saying the same thing all the time. Every place you go in, you're having to think, right, how do I maneuver this conversation? First, I've got to see if they understand send. And then if they understand send, right, then I've got to talk about, well, this doesn't affect me in that way. What are you trying to say? Well, are you trying to say that I'm this way? Are you trying to say that I'm racist? Yeah, I am actually. Right, I'm not having that conversation. We'll call the meeting off now. You're like, okay then.
Yes, it's the extra burden on you to sort of like act in a way that won't offend people in order to get yourself heard. Again, it's that extra sort of thing you have to jump through.
They want you to tone down. They don't want you to talk on it because it's like they feel uncomfortable with it, and they don't want you to touch on something they don't understand. I think they do understand, they just don't want to touch on it. It's there in their face. It's not like they don't know. If they deal with, is it equality and fairness or justice, they know, but they don't want to talk about it because it's too, I don't know. I can talk about it, but a lot of people don't want to because they feel, what is there to be ashamed of? Because everywhere you look now, it's all in your face. Everywhere you look now, you know, people are talking about it, but I just feel that a lot of people have jumped on it now, and they've watered it down and made it look okay for them, but it's not okay.
And Parent Care Forum, they've got to do more. And we're not talking about tokenism. They've got to do more. They've got to show it in their actions. And the leading charities that are there supposed to be advocating for disabled, they need to ensure that there is representation at the trustee level. I'm not talking at the volunteer level. I'm talking at trustee, where the decisions are made.
And what would you like to see then? Let's start kind of like more locally at schools. If you could have a tick list of changes that you'd like to see in the next year, I'm giving you an unlimited budget here. This is going to be our wish list, going to get my little magic wands for you. At schools, what do you think schools could be doing within the next year to improve things?
Abolish exclusions. You know that I'm part of NME, no more exclusions. Got to give them a shout out. They need to abolish it. Because as long as schools have the power to exclude, they will continue to use it and widen equality. That's number one. Two, the workforce needs to represent at all levels. The journey for me to get to a head teacher was like titanium. You talk about glass ceiling, hell to the no. It was titanium. And even then when I got there, it was difficult like hell. And I've not gone back in because it's been so difficult. Representation, the curriculum, and I don't want to hear that word decolonize the curriculum because that's another word that needs to go in Room 101 as well, because it doesn't mean anything. It's become a watered down version. We need an education system that is fit for all children. What they've done, they've created a system that every child has got to fit into. And if a Black child doesn't fit into it, they've got to get out. If your hair is like this and you're going to school and it's too big, it needs to be cut. Imagine that.
Or tied back.
Yeah, because it's not appropriate. So that's my thing. Anti-racist policies in school, abolish exclusions, and ensure that teaching workforce, as well as all the other things that go under that, they're the three that I'd say for today. There's loads more, but
Vanessa, have you got any to add?
Mine is, I feel that every school should have a send, I won't say BME, could put BME. If depending on the area, because every area is different, I think every school should have a send after school activity to educate the parents. That's my thing, because if the parents, especially when it comes to those who goes to residential schools, they don't, I don't think some of them engage. It's just that they're just sent off and that's it. So I think that every parent should have a training. I think it should be compulsory. I know that's me. I'm sorry. I'm being hard, because I know from my perspective, I only learned from listening to specialists like Marguerite. And the other one is no exclusions, because I know when my daughter was excluded, I saw the damage it did. For some autistic people, it's like a holiday for them. It's a way of getting out of school. They don't realize, do it, they're out. It helps them. Pupil referral unit, no, I will get rid of that, because that's what happened. My daughter was excluded. She went to pupil referral unit as well. And it is about making sure, for me, support for girls who've got additional needs. I think that's so important. And another one to put into place is when you're looking at, is it PHSE, sex education? I think there needs to be social skill and friendship groups in there, because I've seen the damage that has been caused. Teach sex education. I've seen what has happened to quite a few autistic young people where they've got caught up in tricky situations because of sex education being taught the mainstream way. So I feel that every school should have a special needs perspective and not just mainstream.
Okay, and so I'm going to give you another magic wand now, and we're going to go up to sort of like a higher level. We're going to go local authority level. In the next year, what would you like to see change at local authority and even government level? What needs to change?
Local authority level, I'd like them to be disbanded. I don't think they can prove that they can manage SEND. They've made them up 2014. They made a move. They've not been. They don't look at it through an intersectional lens anyway at all. You know, parents having to fight for HCPs is ludicrous. That needs to be looked at seriously. There needs a reform of how they manage that process, not just the children and families out, because they are still not reading it. It's like they've taken it and we'll have this page and then throw the rest away. There's no implementation of it. They're just picking the bits and cherry picking the bits that work for them, instead of, like you just said, serving the community that they serve. You know, what happens in your area is going to be different in mine. What happens in Vanessa's area is going to be different, but there's none of that. It's a blanket policy for everybody, which is wrong. At government level, it's a resounding no. If I think that BME, as you said, I can't stand that word, that black people are the voices heard, it's a resounding no. Bernard Coe wrote about it. Macpherson report. We don't need any more studies on us. We don't need any more studies on us. Yes, data sets for sending used in the correct way to identify, but no more studies. The Macpherson report covered it. Go back to it. Institutional racism from Stephen Lawrence. It's there. Look at it. Dr. Remy's just written one about the racism in schools by the Runnymede Trust. That's absolutely excellent. That's current. It's up to date. It refers to the same things. We're on the same situation now. That needs to be happened. We need to dismantle the structures that feed into inequality. That's what we need to happen. And they're the difficult conversations that need to happen. But currently, I'm not sure. We're going to have to find a different way of doing that.
Vanessa, anything to add?
Wow. If I had my way, I would scrap the social services. Sorry. I've never had a good experience. I don't care what anybody says to me. I mean, Marguerite knows my story. As much as people see me smiling, I haven't got really nothing good to say about the system. I just feel they need to be scrapped and start all over again. I know it's hard to say, but that would be my wish. Scrap, start again, and get people that love what they do. Not people. To me, some people have got a job because they've done it just for money and not to do it for love. So my thing is about restructuring the people at the top who are making the decisions, and make sure that you are making sure that word inclusion doesn't mean inclusion, is people at the top are white, middle class people making decisions for Black, Asian families who are missing. And if you've got an Asian professional in that establishment, they are not speaking for the black person. Everybody goes by ticking the boxes of what they've heard or making assumptions. And that's why, for me, it's scrapping. I think they need to scrap it and start again.
So, you know, this may not be easy to sum up in like 1 or 2 sentences, but what would you hope that people take away from listening to you guys say? What's your one takeaway message for those listening?
That you can't be inclusive if you don't understand intersectionality, and you've got to, if you were strong about social justice and social equity in work, that's where you need to start.
Mine's be transparent, be honest, and don't walk away from a situation because you don't understand. Signpost, network, learn to understand the person, who they are.
That's brilliant. Thanks so much, guys. It's been, I could talk to you for hours and hours, but Tanya would kill me if I did that. So thanks so much for joining me. And we hope everyone's found it really, really interesting and has perhaps learned something from it today. Yeah, as Marguerite said, we're very, very open to taking in ideas about what else you'd like to see us talk about, who you'd like us to try and talk to. If you want to send us suggestions, you can do that through our Facebook group or in the comments on the post that this will be posted on, or any other platform that we're on, on Twitter as well, obviously. Thanks again, guys. It's been really, really helpful. Hopefully we'll have another conversation really, really soon.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.